get on to the show. So we were a big concept, obviously, in Taoism is balance, and I guess one of the major things, obviously, yin and yang. To simplify the idea of the yin and yang is to show the kind of harmony and balance in the world in the way opposing factors both take from and give to one another. Right, is a very real high end way of looking at it. Dr. Carl has some thoughts on balance. I'm going to start with the great Lao Tzu and get his thoughts, and then we can dovetail into a deeper discussion on balance. But I guess you always got to start with the one. As James Brown would say, to get to the source here with what Lao Tzu says.
That's right, source.
And some of the things he says is, the great way is easy, yet people prefer the side paths. Be aware when things are out of balance, stay centered with the Tao. As it acts in this world, the Tao is like the bending of a bow. The top is bent downward, the bottom is bent up. It adjusts excess and deficiency so that there is perfect balance. When you stand with your 2 feet on the ground, you will always keep your balance. Stay centered with the Tao. When rich spectators prosper while farmers lose their land, when government officials spend money on weapons instead of cures, when the upper class is extravagant and irresponsible while the poor have nowhere to turn, all this is robbery and chaos. It is not keeping with the Tao. And if you happen to live in the United States of America or on planet Earth, it shows how the world has not changed since the days of Lao Tzu.
No, not terribly much.
No. It is hard to keep your balance standing tiptoe, which I believe later we're going to get to in a future show, which is a bit of a knock on arrogance. And finally, he who holds balance has attained the highest post in the world. Now, interesting in a weird way that one would think that achieving balance, the highest post in the world would be a balanced person. And that seems odd because the highest post in the world doesn't seem like not being at one extreme or the other if it's the highest. Right? Or it doesn't even seem the most desirable place in the world because almost the world of balance almost seems like a world of no movement, a world that is boring. But I'm sure that when we get to the truth of it, that's not really where it is.
You know, it's like that old saw about it depends on what is.
All right.
Depends on what's high.
Yeah.
You know. What does one call high?
Yeah. Well, the old saying, 2 guys are on acid, and one guy says, I'm at 1 with the universe. And the next guy says, is that on a scale of 1 to 10?
Exactly. You know, so balance, again, as you have correctly surmised, balance is a large topic within Taoism and spoken of all the time. But it can easily be, I think, underappreciated or misinterpreted or misunderstood also.
Yeah.
Like so many things in this world. Of course, many are aware of the topic of balance from learning about the precepts of yin and yang, as you mentioned, you know, which is really not so much opposing forces necessarily, but more of the dynamic interplay of universal forces and energies in nature. Now, of course, it's observed that we experience, you know, obviously night and day, hot and cold, dark and light, and so on. But again, it's the dynamic interplay of these forces or concepts that are important and that allow us to achieve balance. Prolonged immersion in the extremes is not helpful often and is problematic. For example, extreme temperatures at either end can be devastating if you're exposed to either for prolonged periods of time, you know, hot and cold, right? You can burn up in the desert or freeze at the North Pole.
Yeah.
But yet, in nature, there is a place for extreme temperatures, and there's a place for extreme cold.
Mm-hmm.
If we didn't have the heat, and a lot of that heat is actually in some cases coming up from the center of the earth,
Mm-hmm.
right? Volcanic forces, and that allows the surface temperature to normalize and regulate in certain ways.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other hand, we have extreme cold, which has created things like glaciers,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which has also done a lot over the years to regulate our conditions here on planet Earth. Of course, now with global climate change and warming and so on, a lot of that is being threatened.
Right, right.
And we're seeing the folly of moving out of what's natural. Because in some cases, being at the extreme is natural in those cases.
Yeah.
But in other cases, like our daily lives, it typically is not.
Well, it's the other day I saw this really moving picture, and it was of a polar bear, and about how because now the ice melt, like the amount of time that the Arctic is completely frozen, it has been shortened by about 7 weeks, right? So now that 7-week change means that the polar bears that would live on these kind of chunks of ice and would use them for transportation and would hunt from them and everything, now have 7 weeks less to get their blubber, to get out there on the ice and feed on the seals and all this stuff. And so that now you're having towards the end of certain times of the year, their blubber is gone and they're dissipated and they're dying off because of this slight change in global temperature. And it shows how the current state of animals and everything we have, exists because of this basic balance. And when you throw it off,
it affects
we'll find a new balance, which I don't know.
It affects the entire ecosystem.
Yeah.
And over a long period of time, who knows what that's going to do. Remember, it's taken hundreds of thousands, millions of years, to get to the dynamic balance that we have now.
Yeah.
And then now, through our own intercession, often fueled by greed, those conditions that were stable for, several million years are no longer stable.
Yeah.
And what's going to be the result of that? We shall see.
Now, this seems like kind of a nihilistic thought, but a thought nonetheless. What if, sounds terrible for me saying this, but I'll just say it anyway. What if the new balance is better? You know what I'm saying? Like what if there's the Earth goes 3 degrees warmer. There's catastrophic things happen. There's much death and everything like that, but 1,000 years down the line, certain predators are now gone that we don't have to worry about. You know what I'm saying?
Such as mankind.
Yes, no, seriously. I mean, that could.
I mean, you see, there's what's good for the earth, and then there's what's good for mankind and various subspecies on the earth.
Right.
And those may not be always the same.
Yeah.
And so over the long, Mother Earth, over the long haul, she's been around for, hundreds, millions of years, maybe hundreds of millions of years.
Yeah.
And we've been here a much shorter period of time.
Yeah.
And as we do know, there have been several mass extinction events, at least 6 that I know of, over time that they can kind of measure.
Yeah.
And so what does the future hold?
Oh, no.
If we don't attend to... See nature, without us here, has perfect balance automatically.
Right.
Mother Nature doesn't have to worry about balancing itself. It happens because Mother Nature is in touch fully with the Tao at all times,
right,
and doesn't have to worry about that. We, however, who struggle with trying to be in harmony with the Tao, we can throw a monkey wrench into the process and cause things to radically shift in ways that in the big picture are not natural.
Right.
See, and that's our dilemma right now. And again, it's not that extremes necessarily are not helpful or useful. For example, we need extreme heat in order to melt steel or concrete for construction projects. We need extreme cold if we want to, say, freeze hydrogen for some scientific purposes. And so it's really not so much that extremes necessarily all the time are inappropriate. It's a matter of wu wei, effortless action. What is the most appropriate for the given task at hand to accomplish what's necessary in order for growth, creativity, life, essentially.
Right.
And that, of course, can change from period to period, from project to project, from people to people, from culture to culture, and so on. There is no fixed center. There's a moving center.
Yes.
And it moves as is appropriate to the moment in time. And that's always shifting. And
balance is knowing how to interact with the moving center versus trying to oppose will on the moving center.
Balance requires access to the precise set of conditions necessary for the particular circumstances. Wu wei, effortless action.
So it's almost like wu wei is the way of, again, countering the moving center or creating balance. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of our way of internally creating balance with the external world to then, and if we do that en masse, there'll be probably a more fortunate situation.
Right. It's as if wu wei is our capacity to act in concert with that shifting center.
Right.
And which, of course, is shifting with time. And because that's, of course, is the true constant is time.
Right.
Time continuously shifts. However, of course, as the Taoists have pointed out, over time, these factors, these forces tend to shift with some recognizable patterns. Right. The one that, of course, we're really familiar with, of course, are the seasons of the year. The winter is very different than the spring, which is very different than the summer, which is very different than the winter. But yet, every year, like clockwork, we always have a winter and a spring and a summer and a fall. There can be shifts within each one, and there are every year, but that pattern is recognizable. And wisdom, and from a Taoist perspective, is being able to recognize those patterns, harmonize ourselves with those patterns so that we achieve that effortless harmony, that effortless action, in harmony with our own inner nature, in harmony with the great Tao.
Right. Now, right now, thing that my wife wanted us in the new year to get on this diet, and it's called like a Whole30 diet, where you don't eat dairy, and you don't eat carbohydrates, and you don't eat sugars, and you don't have alcohol, and you don't have all these different things, and then
you're going to be so healthy, you're going to be obnoxious.
I know. I'm going to start telling everybody how to live, which I do not want to do. But so, and my gut reaction was that as somebody who is, big time into Taoist philosophy and knows that extremes are what I should avoid, as in extreme diets. Like I've always found before, if I want to lose weight, I just kind of, I limit over a long period of time. I limit certain things and everything comes fine. I don't have to throw everything out of whack. But then it was an interesting thing is someone was telling me, they go, no. If you do this correctly, the point in doing it is to find balance. And I said, what? He goes, well, yeah, through the extreme you find balance because you eliminate all these things. And then when you slowly reintroduce them into your system, when you're done with the diet, you find that you kind of refigure out your own harmony. Like, okay, I can have this amount of this. I can have this amount of alcohol. I can have this amount of dairy or apple pie or whatever. And so it's the point of the reintroduction that you rebalance. So it's almost you're going to an extreme to find the balance versus just doing something extreme that you're not going to keep up with, that then you're going to overeat when you come back on the other end. So then I thought, okay, this is a good idea because I'm finding balance through the extreme, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know it does.
If not, it's just extreme behavior, which will lead to folly, right?
In fact, it requires an intimate knowledge of one's true nature, subject, of course, to change. Within the human body, we have temperature regulation, as well as all sorts of metabolic functioning that requires adaptation and change for survival, but within certain parameters. There's a zone of health, within all of our organic, physiological functioning.
Yeah.
If you get past a certain temperature, you're in trouble. If you get underneath a certain temperature, you're in trouble.
Right.
Metabolism happens continuously all the time, but within a range.
Right.
Within a range. Again, it's slightly different from person to person, sometimes even from people to people, culture to culture, but within that group, it still finds its own balance.
Right.
And if you get outside of that balance, too extreme for too prolonged period of time, then that's when trouble usually occurs. And also, we even have, as human beings, I'm sure we are all aware of things like pain.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody likes pain, unless you're really strange.
Yeah.
And we have strange people here on planet Earth who are into pain. But pain is the body's signal that there's something out of balance that you need to address and get some medication, do some therapy, do some, some type of work on yourself to go back and to restore the normal physiological balance of the body. Sometimes it requires drastic measures, right? Surgery, right? There's a tumor or something in there that's interfering and causing the pain. And other times it's just a matter of maybe changing your diet and your lifestyle.
Yeah.
And you can more easily shift so that you move into that wu way, that natural unforced balance, so that your life begins to work and you feel better about yourself. You feel more enriched. You feel more creative. You feel like you have more energy to find and activate your purpose in life. And you are in harmony with the Tao, and all is well.
Right.
But it takes a degree of self-knowing, which requires self-observation in order to pull that off. And that, of course, is where the core Taoist practice of meditation is so important. Think about human affairs and relationships and life. And I'm sure you've seen people who have very little self-awareness and self-knowledge. And as a result, what do? They keep making the same mistakes over and over and over. I'm sure you've seen people that have even great capacity, great skills, talk about it at the extremes, but you see them squander it and waste it, right, by not realizing or not expressing that which actually comes quite natural to them, but they let other things in their life or in their relationships or in their own heads interfere with what to anyone else, observer from the outside, is obvious. But yet to the person themselves, the person who actually has the skill, the ability, the talent, which clearly is resonating with them, but for some reason, they have these obstacles, these blocks in the way that keep them from fulfilling their own path. And, we look at persons like that and, with regret. And in fact, many of these same individuals later in life, when they're kind of like on their deathbed, they will tell you that is in fact their biggest regret, that they did not, it wasn't so much what they did, it's what they didn't do.
Yeah, the roadblocks they never broke down in order to get to that.
Right. I mean, talents and skills that they obviously had, but they just let it go.
Yeah, and I guess it's a complicated thing to in one easy step say, okay, how do you get if somebody feels blocked, how do you get past that?
Well, as a Taoist priest, kind of spiritual healer and counselor and clinical psychologist, of course, that's my job.
Right, exactly.
That's what I frequently have to do all the time, is help people really fulfill their path, their purpose in life.
And get them in balance, and so that they can
so that what is within them becomes easily expressed in the external world. Again, this thing about as within, so without.
Yeah.
So there's that. Now that's really wu wei. Effortless action, because one is merely fulfilling one's own inner purpose, but by clearing the obstacles that would otherwise not allow it to manifest. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's called wisdom.
Yes.
That's called wisdom.